Good morning. My name is Jim Robb. I'm the president of the National Training and Simulation Association, otherwise known as NTSA. So welcome to the August webinar, where we talk about the Space Force, a 360-degree view on training, simulation, and logistics. For those of you who are new to NTSA, we are a nonprofit association dedicated to facilitating dialogue between government, industry, academia, on topics related to providing the best training and training systems to our warfighters and first responders. We host a portfolio of 9 events each year, the last of which is IATSEC, the largest training and simulation conference in the world. Today's discussion is part of our ongoing dialogue about the new Space Force. We are collectively on a journey to discover, what is Space Force, how it's organized, and what its training requirements might be. So today's panel will try to address some of that. I think we all want to learn a great deal about this new exciting area and look forward to the discussion. So thanks for your questions in advance and your interest in the webinar. We have over 225 folks registered, which is really high on the webinar scale. So following the panel's opening remarks, and our speakers will answer your questions, I think, over the time. And you also have the ability to address real-time questions to them through the chat. The webinar is scheduled for an hour, and we will try to maintain that timeline in respect for all who are time for all who are participating. So let me get off the stage and introduce our moderator, Dr. Grace Bochenek. She's the director of the School of Modeling and Simulation and Training at the University of Central Florida. Grace is a pioneer and leader in research and development technology. In her current role, she plans to capitalize on USAF 40-year history as an early pioneer in human-centered modeling and simulation research to expand modeling simulation at USAF. So we appreciate her participation, her joining the team there at USAF, and we look forward to her comments. So with that, over to you, Grace.
Well, thank you. And hello to everyone. And thank you for joining us today. First, let me just thank you, Admiral Robb and NTS, for first putting on this event and for giving us this opportunity, which I think is a valuable opportunity for our community as we look and to seek to support the U.S. Space Force in their most critical mission. So we hope that everyone that's attending enjoys today's webinar, comes out of it with a little new perspective, and would be intrigued to joining us as we continue to refine and contribute our support. The U.S. Space Force, established in 2019 as the newest branch of the armed services, with what I believe is a very important mission. The U.S. Space Force is responsible for organizing, training, and equipping Guardians to conduct global space operations. And that's a lot when you think about it, right? A very complex mission with a lot of complexity, of which there's a critical role that modeling and simulation plays in support of training and readiness of that force. Central Florida is really important, and it has been important, Central Florida and its extended partners, because of its long history as an epicenter for modeling and simulation, and using those modeling and simulation to affect defense training. Today's panel represents that ecosystem. We plan to provide you perspectives from the U.S. Space Force, the space and training readiness, a perspective from those who are looking at workforce development and the ROTC program, a perspective from industry, and again, my perspective as the University of Central Florida as an academic. As mentioned, UCF has a long history and legacy in modeling and simulation and training, and also has a long legacy in supporting space. The school that I manage is the School for Modeling, Simulation, and Training. It also houses the Institute for Simulation and Training. And as mentioned by Admiral Robb, it has a 40-year history of supporting and leading and contributing to this modeling and simulation community. UCF was founded in 1963, and interesting enough, it was founded to provide talent to the growing Central Florida U.S. space program. We are the #1 supplier of graduates for the U.S. aerospace and defense industries, which is a proud accomplishment for the University of Central Florida. And we have a very robust Air Force and Space Force ROTC program, which you'll hear more about in a minute. I just want to mention before I introduce the panel and we start our dialogue is, recently UCF has been collaborating with the U.S. Space Force and other universities as part of a U.S. Space Force University Consortium, where we're looking to advance the technology capabilities and to support the future guardians. In fact, we've added an additional step. We have an educational partnership agreement in place with Space Force, and it's a very strong tool by which we could start engaging in a lot of different ways with Space Force. This strong partnership is why we are so excited to bring this panel together to talk about U.S. Space Force and its impact on the future of training and how we can all contribute to that future. So with that, hopefully that helps set the stage. I'd like to introduce the panel, and then we'll begin questioning. I'll start with Colonel Jack Fulmer, and Jack often goes by Jay, for those of you who may run into him. But Colonel Fulmer is the commander for Space Delta 10, Headquarters Space Training and Readiness Command. Currently at the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado, he is responsible for developing and publishing space doctrine and tactics, as well as codifying lessons and executing the STARCOM wargaming series. Colonel Fulmer graduated from Birmingham Southern College in Alabama, was commissioned in 1994 as an Air Force Reserve Officer, ROTC, and multiple operation and training assignments. And I mean, so vast and so, so accomplished. Space control, satellite command and control missions. He comes with a wealth of expertise to help shape the future of training and readiness for Star Command. The second, let me introduce, would be Colonel Michael Peeler. Colonel Peeler is the commander of the Air Force Reserve Officer Training Corps, Detachment 159. He's also a professor of aerospace studies here at the University of Central Florida, and he leads all the recruiting, administration, instruction, and evaluation activities required to develop and support more than 250 prospective Air Force officers attending the university. Colonel Peeler graduated from the U.S. Army. I apologize. I have a long history with the Army, so it kind of naturally comes out. But from the U.S. Air Force Academy in 1998, he also has served in numerous positions as squadron, wing, NAF, major command, and joint positions. He is a command pilot with more than 3,500 hours in several different aircraft, and has supported combat tours and Operation Enduring Freedom, Iraqi Freedom, New Dawn, Inherent Resolve, and Joint Forge. I'm glad that he's here at UCF and doing some great things in support of the future of the Air Force and the future of the Space Force. And the last panelist who will be joining us is George Cheros. George is the president and CEO of the National Center for Simulation. He oversees all aspects of a over 300 member industry organization that represents the modeling and simulation industry. He leads the organization to promote the growth of the modeling and simulation industry. He drives tech transfer for proven defense-based technology to vertical markets across several industries. And he's so passionate about STEM education and the role that STEM plays in the future of a workforce. So happy to have this panel and the opportunity for the conversation we're about to have. So with that introduction, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to take a minute, and I'll start with Colonel Fulmer, just to take a few minutes to introduce themselves and to tell a little bit more about their involvement with Space Force.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bochenek, and good morning to everyone. So, Colonel J. Fulmer, commander of Space Delta 10. We stood up about a year ago, so a year and a week ago, responsible for doctrine, tactics, now concepts as well, lessons learned, and wargaming going forward. So, for those of you that in the audience who are Air Force, you recognize maybe the LeMay Center and Air Force Warfare Center combined under one umbrella or under one hat. From the Army side, it'd be more TRADOC going forward. So, spent 27 years as an airman, space operations with a variety of assignments, and of course, in 2019, when the president signed the NDAA legislation that established the Space Force, had an opportunity to transfer over, which I did May of 2021, and been on a pretty incredible journey ever since, working with some incredible Americans trying to establish this organization, to meet the mission objectives that our elected leaders have set out for us, and to prepare for what invariably will come as a conflict in space. And so, and then August of last year, I had an opportunity to take command of Delta 10 as the founding commander, and working hard to establish the Space Force's first set of doctrine. If you look at the history of the Air Force, the history of the Air Force was established, following World War II with proven tactics and doctrine. The Space Force doesn't have that, at least not yet. And so we were established because some pioneering and far-sighted leaders in Congress and in the previous administration foresaw a growing threat from adversaries that could not only challenge us, our supremacy in space, but could look at potentially taking away our capability to operate unfettered in space. And so that was the rationale going forward for establishing the Space Force. And since then, we've been, like I said, working to try to catch up with doctrine, with tactics, basic organizational constructs, which I'll get more into here in just a little bit.
Thank you, Colonel Fulmer. Colonel Peeler?
Hey, thank you, Dr. Bochenek, for the introduction. Very kind words. Excited to be on the panel today. This is going to be a great discussion. So I'm the AFROTC commander and the professor of aerospace studies here at the University of Central Florida, where we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 to 250 cadets at any given time who are interested in becoming leaders, officers in our Air Force and officers in our Space Force. And so it's been a very interesting assignment here, working with excited young people and being at what a great university, so tied in closely with the Space Coast, with all that's going on over there. And as you mentioned, in 1963, it was established to support the ongoing space efforts on the Cape. And so we still feel that here at the university. We still recognize that draw to the Space Force. And so we tend to hit above our weight class when it comes to putting officers into the Space Force. Although the Air Force ROTC program is going to remain the primary commissioning source for both Air Force officers and Space Force officers into perpetuity. There's no plan to make it our own Space Force ROTC or Space Academy for that matter. So we will still be the primary commissioning source for officers that go on to lead in our Space Force. So I'm looking forward to the panel discussion. Thank you for the introduction.
Thanks, Colonel Peeler. George?
Hey, thank you, Grace, and thank you, Admiral Rob, for hosting this seminar. I think it's going to be very valuable, and I'm honored to be here with both Colonel Peeler and Colonel Fulmer. Just a little bit of background on the National Center for Simulation in Team Orlando. The National Center for Simulation, our mission is to lead the growth of the modeling and simulation industry, but as it relates to defense, it's to promote, protect, and grow the $6.5 billion Central Florida modeling, simulation, and training community. Just as an aside, in terms of our ties to Space Force, the National Center for Simulation was started in 1993 with a express purpose of taking all this wonderful technology that's been developed in modeling and simulation by the military and transferring it as much as possible to other vertical markets and, typical consumer and industrial applications. It was a passion of then President Bill Clinton to really introduce a lot of these tech transfer initiatives. So NCS, our initial seed funding, actually came from a White House grant that flowed through NASA. So I guess I could say that the space industry is kind of our initial shareholder. So it's kind of come full circle, and we're happy to be having this discussion. The military has all branches of the service here in Orlando at the Central Florida Research Park, executing both the technology side and the acquisition side of modeling and simulation technology. Back in 1950, the Army and the Navy signed a joint agreement to collaborate on modeling and simulation. And then in 1960, and they were actually headquartered out of the North Shore of Long Island at the old Guggenheim Mansion. In 1966, they moved all that operation to Central Florida at the old Naval Training Center. And in 1988, it all got stood up at the research park adjacent to UCF. So again, thank you for having me as part of this discussion. And I look forward to discussing how over time we can transition Space Force into our community as we have the other 4 services.
Thank you, George. I appreciate it. So you can see why I'm pretty excited about this panel, right? This is a panel that has a lot of perspective and depth, and we look forward to this, the conversation we're about to have. So I'll be asking a few questions from each of the panelists, and I'll start with you, Colonel Fulmer. And again, just a little bit, if you can give us a little background on Space Force, right? I mentioned the mission, but the vision, the mission, where is the Space Force, with modeling and simulation capabilities? Just a more, a little more insight.
So, the thing that we say oftentimes in the Space Force is that we're having to fly this plane while at the same time that we're trying to build it. And we've had a lot of Herculean efforts in terms of trying to ensure that we prosecute the mission that's been given to us while we establish the hierarchy of the Space Force. But the great thing about having a new service is that we have a blank slate. And so our chief, General Raymond, looked across all the services to try to figure out what was the best organizational construct that we need to fall under. One thing we knew is that we're going to be a small service, and we're going to be a small service for quite some time. We have approximately 8,500 military and roughly 8,500 to 9,000 civilians. Now that will change in time, more than likely, but those changes or growth are not projected anytime in the near future. And so we had to look in terms of making sure that we streamlined our organizational hierarchy as much as we could, and adopted in many ways the Army's model. So, for example, our basic warfighting organization is still the squadron, which you'd find in the Air Force. But unlike the Air Force, which has an ops group or a mission support group or a med group, we go straight to the Delta level, which is also equivalent of the wing. On the Army side, you would find that as I believe it's a brigade. And so deltas are broken down into 2 types. We have the space-based deltas, for example, or the garrisons, which operate Patrick Space Force Base, Peterson Space Force Base, etc. And then you have the operational deltas, or just the regular space deltas, which are organized around a particular mission set. So, for example, my delta, as I said earlier, is organized around the doctrine and tactics and wargaming lessons learned piece. Delta 1, which is a sister organization under Space Training and Readiness Command, is organized around training. So whether it's a BMT, initial qualifications training, weapons school, all those type of things, etc. And so what has happened is we've been able to streamline with our limited number of people. So a squadron commander has direct access to what would be a wing commander. And then next level is what we have, our field commands, equivalent to MAGCOMs. Right now we have 3 field commands: the Space Training and Readiness Command, which is commanded by Major General Sean Bratton. Space Operations Command is commanded by Lieutenant General Stephen Whiting. And then you have Space Systems Command, which is the acquisition arm, which is commanded by Lieutenant General Mike Goodline. So interestingly enough, STARCOM is currently undergoing a basing action. So we've been doing site surveys at most of the Space Force bases and a couple Air Force bases around the country. In fact, Delta 10 just had, back in April, our one and only candidate location was announced, and it's down at Patrick Space Force Base. And so we're waiting for the Secretary of the Air Force to release the preferred location, which we're assuming is going to be down at Patrick. So exciting times for us, but obviously a lot of work ahead of us as we continue to move forward. From a simulation and modeling perspective, this is a very important topic for me in particular as the individual who's charged with wargaming. Right now, Space Force has one primarily Title 10 war game, and that's Shrewer War Games that uses the 10-year epic. Is designed more for at the strategic level, so it gives General Raymond, General Saltzman, General Corey, our senior most individuals an opportunity to practice their decision making and command and control processes, etc. But we're expanding that into a STARCOM wargaming series. We're just now starting to really put pen to paper on what that looks like. We believe that Shrewer War Games will still be the central hub or the gemstone to that series. But you'll have NATO war games as part of it. You'll have doctrine war games. We'll have different type of vignettes or war game tabletop exercises going forward as we continue to build this out. So having a modeling sim capability is extremely important. Right now, even though the United States Department of Defense has been doing space for a long time, we don't really have a good modeling and sim capability. We have an emulator. The standard space trainer, which is really good for basic initial qualification training, but it's not designed for advanced type of training going forward, and it's certainly not designed to help us with our wargaming activities. So myself, along with Brigadier General Todd Moore, who's the Deputy Commander for STARCOM, have been trying to figure out what different type of modeling and simulation capabilities are out there. We're not necessarily interested in reinventing the wheel. We're more interested in taking, what is already out there, and if we find them useful in meeting our needs, then adopting that as a Space Force tool. So what are we looking for in terms of modeling the sim? Obviously, physics-based modeling, but more important, we need a model that can accurately represent the behavior of things that are in space. And so if we have something obviously that's attacked, but not necessarily destroyed, what are the ramifications for that? If you have a senior leader that makes a decision, how does that decision look in terms of the assets that we have? So having accurate behavioral modeling is extremely important to us. We also need to have models that are able to rapidly change in response to live data. We are absolutely not, from a data perspective, in a static environment, and data changes very, very quickly. And we need models that are robust enough that can change as we get new data that comes in. We also need, from a modeling sim perspective, it can't just be focused on wargame. We also have a huge need from a training perspective. As I mentioned earlier, we have the standard space trainer, which is good for initial qualification training, but it's really designed, if you input a command, then you based on that command, you get the response. But there's nothing that you can do in terms of advanced training with it, at least not yet. And so we need things that can do advanced type of training that will be useful for any type of exercises that we're participating in, for our range activities as well as test and eval. The one thing that I want to make clear, though, is that we're not necessarily going to be wedded to a single simulation or analysis engine. right? Because we don't feel that a single engine will necessarily meet all of our needs. But we're absolutely open to doing different type of modeling engines, you know, for whatever utility that we need it for, whether it's training, whether it's testing, whether it's exercises, whether it's wargaming. So we are just getting started with this effort. But, you know, as I told General Moore last week, you know, for us, as we're preparing for a potential move to Patrick Space Force Base, you know, which and that decision was made by General Raymond himself, because Orlando is the modeling sim hub of, you know, capital of the United States, and so we want to be close proximity to University of Central Florida. We want to be close proximity to the Air Force Modeling Simulation, you know, agency that's there is in Orlando as well. The Army has their terrestrial environment that they're working on there, and so it makes for, I think, for a very cohesive symbiotic relationship having us down at Patrick. But you know, we're looking at some point building a wargaming center at Patrick, and when we do that, we want to know, you know, have reasonable surety of what system that we're going to use, because we want to design, you know, our building around the IT needs of that system. So this is a top priority not only for me, but for General Moore going forward, to make sure that we find the right, you know, engine or engines that will meet the Space Force training, test, and evaluation of wargaming needs.
Colonel Fulmer, that was that was outstanding. Just to hear the breadth of what you're doing, and as you were talking, you know, I'm sure that the folks on this webinar and all of us on the panel are translating, you know, what we're currently doing and how you can take advantage of that, right? And I know that, you know, the dialogue that, you know, at least the universities we've been having with Space Force is really about the fact that it is lean, and you mentioned it being lean. And so using and relying on, you know, the universities, the extended industry partners to accelerate what you're doing will be really important. I will ask, there was one, before I move to the next question, there was one question that came in earlier, and maybe this would be a good time just to ask you. People are really interested, like, where they get an org chart, right? The simple structure, you know, is that even public? And if it is public, maybe if you know where that is, or we can make sure that people on the webinar get that later after this.
The first place I would look is spaceforce.mil. I know there's a wealth of information on there and stuff, but what I can do is in the next day or two send you an org chart that shows the 3 field commands and then all the deltas up under them. Like I said, you know, STARCOM has 5 deltas ranging from training all the way to PME. You know, SPOC has about 9 deltas, and then you have the Space Systems Command, which has a little bit different organizational construct. That I can provide that to you, Dr. Bochenek, and then we can get that out to you.
We can share it. Thank you very much. So I will move a little bit to Colonel Peeler. Knowing your responsibility around recruitment, can you talk a little bit about what does the recruitment look like potentially for Space Force? What can we anticipate they may need and want in terms of talent and workforce development from your perspective?
Thanks, Dr. Bochenek. Yeah, there's been a lot of talk in the news lately about Department of Defense recruiting. And so I'll tell you that the Air Force and the Space Force, we generally don't have the same problems that some of the other services do with recruiting. We do pretty well. On the Space Force side, as you heard Colonel Fulmer say, it's going to be a small, lean, mean fighting force with an end strength projected right now to be 16,000. And that's about, you know, 8,500 active duty members. So for comparison, the Air Force has 332,000 active duty members. So a fairly small force, at least in the current projections. So what does that mean for recruiting? It means we probably don't have the recruiting problem that some of the other services have, and the Space Force gets to be fairly selective. Now, here at the University of Central Florida in the ROTC program, we're making officers for the Air Force and the Space Force. And we tend to hit above our weight class when it comes to putting officers into the Space Force. And in part, that's because of the way the university is structured, the types of degree programs they have here. But the Space Force will be looking for those STEM degrees. So one of the questions that came in on the chat was about STEM education requirements for cadets to be eligible. Well, currently, there's no specific written requirements that are going to be make someone eligible to go into the Space Force. But I'll tell you that to compete for those limited number of positions, to compete to be commissioned into the Space Force, you're going to have a much better chance with a STEM degree. And so we sent a couple officers into the Space Force over the last year, and they've had either aerospace engineering degrees or optics and photonics degrees. In fact, a couple officers are staying back for postgraduate programs. They're commissioned into the Space Force, and they're getting their master's degree here at UCF in photonics. And so I think it's those higher end STEM type programs that the Space Force is going to be looking for. Now, Colonel Fulmer also talked about, the need for modeling and simulation, and that's kind of what we're here to discuss. I happened to be in on a forum yesterday talking about the metaverse, and it was a great discussion. And I was reminded in that from the panel members that the United States Space Force is going to be the only service which their members will not actually have the opportunity to live or work in the environment that they're there to protect, right? So for example, as an airman, I get to fly in the air, and that's our domain. Our sailors get to sail on the oceans or under the oceans. That's their domain. And our soldiers and Marines get to work on land. But if you think about that for a minute, our guardians, most of them, except with very few exceptions, will never have the opportunity to go into space, to touch a satellite. And some of them may have an opportunity to watch a rocket launch. And so the need for a really robust modeling program, simulation program, especially when you get to warfighting exercises, to help our guardians understand the impact of what they have, is going to be extremely valuable as we move forward. And so there was even discussion about this metaverse, and then there was someone said the spaceverse, right? And so this idea that we need to create something that you can be immersed in without actually being in a capsule floating around the Earth, right? So very, very important. And I think so let's go back full circle now to that recruiting and accessions program. As we're bringing young talent into the Space Force, we're going to be looking for folks that have degrees or interest or expertise in those kinds of areas. And again, it's fortunate for us that we at the University of Central Florida are in close proximity to not only the Cape, but also to the epicenter for all things modeling and simulation. And so it's right here in our backyard that these couple of things can come together and be very fruitful for our Space Force.
So Colonel Peeler, as you were talking, it drove me back to my thinking on my opening, which is the complexity of the mission, right? And the way you described it added another layer in my mind, which is being able to defend an area, a domain that you'll never be able to see, understand. So when you think about, technology and equipping, and you think about the training aspects, in my mind, getting towards that metaverse, this digital, being able to do that digitally, and being able to do that digitally throughout that life cycle is going to be so important. And the students, those students, whether they're going through and they're seeking opportunities within, through the ROTC as a guardian, but also there'll be so many opportunities for students as the students move into the industries that end up supporting that. So I thank you for those comments.
Let me suggest one other thought, that it's those students, those younger people who have been immersed in this type of an environment for much of their lives are going to be much more capable of understanding, of taking us to that next step than those of us who were, grew up in the 1900s right? And we're still very analog. So exciting young people here in our ROTC program with a lot of great ideas.
That's great. That's true. That's true. So George, Mr. Cheros, what are you hearing from industry about the needs of Space Force, and maybe a little bit about how the organizations that you've been talking with are getting involved in supporting Space Force?
Well, to start off with, a few months ago, Team Orlando, which is that organization that comprises the leaders of all four services, industry, academia, and the local community, actually added a member to Team Orlando, or a participant from the modeling and simulation community that represents both Space Force and the Air Force. So they are starting to plug into our ecosystem already, which is great news. As you just heard from this previous discussion, a lot of what's going to be going on within Space Force, while in some ways similar to what we do with the other four services, will be, different. It will be a lot more digital, a lot more, gaming involved, using artificial intelligence. So I think in many cases, in terms of training, it's going to be a little bit of a shift. Industry that we deal with is very excited about Space Force coming. I will tell you that the discussions are very preliminary at this point. Other than the large primes who supply, the space industry with all of the equipment. Usually with that also comes the training and simulation that goes with that. But we look forward to integrating the community here with the modeling and simulation community. But also, one of the advantages of being in Central Florida and having this modeling and simulation team here is the other industries in the state and the area that support it. And for example, a lot of great technology comes out of our entertainment industry, as well as our gaming industry, as we have a big facility here with EA Sports. So we look forward to having some integration and some discussions with Space Force to start integrating your organization into our process here.
Thanks, George. And it's been terrific to be a partner with NCS over this past year, and look forward to continuing, creating the synergies and the collaborations so that we can actually, cascade lessons learned much more rapidly, right?
Absolutely. And, it's no accident that you and I sit in buildings right next to each other. So we'll continue to make that work.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So the next question, we touched it a little bit, all of us in some ways, about modeling and simulation, but part of it is, so how does the industry help support the Space Force goals? How do we take next steps of sharing lessons learned, sharing capabilities, the synergies that already exist? So I will ask, I open it to everybody, but maybe starting with Colonel Fulmer, just, you have an industry, you have a strong academic collaborative, which, UCF is part of that, but it extends beyond UCF through other partnerships in the university systems. And so how best do we help support the goals?
So that's a great question. And so the thing I want to bring up is when America finds itself in its first space war, any adversary is not going to, if they've made the decision to attack our, either through kinetic means, direct energy means, through cyber, they've done a calculus that they think they can prevail or significantly degrade our capability to operate and use our space capabilities. And they're not going to attack us or begin their operations on a time and place that's convenient to us. And so if you look at who is it that's probably going to be the advanced guard, it's going to be our young guardian specialist, sergeant level, first, second lieutenant, or even a junior captain on the crews that will begin getting indications that something is not right. And so we need these guardians trained. They need, as Colonel Peeler stated, which is such a huge point for us, is that, unlike the terrestrial services, our guardians are not getting to actually see the satellite. They may see the launch, but they're not going to see it. They're not going to feel how the satellite's going to react in a weightless environment. We can't when we train, we can't put people on ships or in tanks or in aircraft. We're operating from our space operations centers, right? And so we have to have our guardians who understand, not only the domain that they're operating in, but every nut and bolt with that satellite that they're operating, or wherever the capability may be. And so from a modeling sim perspective, from our perspective, helping expose our guardians to the space domain, which is so unique beyond anything that you experience here on this planet, and helping us train them. For example, the Army at Fort Leavenworth is working on a capability to literally, you can design something, and much like what Iron Man did in the Avengers movie, grab a hold of it, open it up, and then take a look at what's inside. And you still have to wear the goggles, so it's not like with Iron Man where he didn't have any glasses or anything like that on. But it's cool because it allows us to design our satellites, and then bring our students in as they're going through training, whether it's initial qualification training or their monthly recurring training, and we can teach them how the satellite actually operates. And so when we start having degradations, whether through cyber, whether through or failures of different systems on the satellite, we need them to understand what those do and what we can do to overcome it. And so in order for that to happen, they really have to be the master of their systems that they're operating. And that's what we really need help in, right? From an industry perspective, how do we get there? How do we design and employ those training type capabilities that allow all men and women who make up the Space Force to have those training capabilities, or opportunities? And as I said earlier, cerebral war games, for example, is primarily designed to allow our senior most leaders, both civilian and military, to exercise their decision-making processes and to see what ramifications their decisions have, not only on our capabilities, but an adversary's capabilities as well. And so getting a chance for them to make a decision and then it's accurately represented, or they can see firsthand what the result of that is, it would be a huge win for us from a training perspective. So.
Would anybody else like to make a comment on that before I make a comment?
Yeah, Grace, let me just add a little bit. Last year we host a Florida Simulation Summit every year, and the theme last year was using digital twin technology for cybersecurity. And I see a lot of parallels with cybersecurity in general and what you're talking about. And from what we heard from our guest speakers and panelists was that the challenge in cyber is not only finding those people like you just described that are capable of finding those issues early on, but it's also the amount of data that they're exposed to and how to give them tools so they can analyze that data very quickly, much more quickly than they could going through it piece by piece on their own, but using tools, whether it's AR, VR, or digital twin technology or artificial intelligence, it gives them that roadmap to do it a lot faster and smarter. So, hopefully I see a possibility for an integration of those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think what you see in general, right? There's a trend on how modeling and simulation is used from early design through its system and how that system is maintained over time. And then you layer onto that the component of the human interface, or the human use, or the soldier use, or the guardian use. And, I think that, as the trends and as computational capabilities and a lot of these technologies are now converging, that's allowing us to move in a direction around this idea of a metaverse, the idea of a meta digital twin, where you can start taking a single system and design that system and use that same system then to explore that system in an environment where then you can start understanding behavior of that system. and the interaction of multiple systems. And then you add the complexity of, training from an individual training to teams that are being trained to, to things that are happening in the gaming industry where you have 1,000-person simultaneous engagements. So there's a lot of these things that are converging around digital twin technology. I think one of the questions in the chat kind of ties into this, and they just mentioned that to tie some of all these together, to start to think about systems engineering approaches. And that's what we've really been talking about, right? The idea of model-based systems engineering. And then how do you, as you create data and tools, how those tools are used for multiple purposes, everything from design and maintenance of systems to training in those systems. So it's complex, but at the same time, I think, like I mentioned, I think there's a convergence of possibilities because of where we are, with where industry has come, where the universities have come, and of course where where the Air Force has come, and where we're now seeing Space Force moving in that direction. Any other anecdotal, any comments, thoughts?
So, Dr. Hennig, I thought Michael Tolkien asked a great question that's very pertinent to what we're currently talking about. So he asked, when it comes to the metaverse and other simulation environments, what is the preferred access point? And that's a great question. And right now we would say all of it. We're open to all of it. We don't know. We are still very early stages of trying to understand what different capabilities are out there. And so whether it's a VR headset, a 3D display, a desktop simulator, or some large scale motion based simulator, right now we're open to it all. We have not closed the door on anything. We're just not educated enough yet on what different modeling and simulation capabilities are out there.
Would it be fair to ask Colonel Fulmer then, in some ways, modeling and simulation is a tool, it's a technique, it's a way to achieve your objectives. How do you look at it from, like, what are the priority missions potentially that might be interesting for industry to put their frame of mind on, right? So if you understand the missions, then you can maybe come back to you with, here are some technologies and how they were deployed in the past.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because every mission set, whether you're in EW or electronic warfare, OW, which is orbital warfare, space domain awareness, they all have different needs and different focuses, right? For example, the space domain awareness is, how do you operate in space when you don't know what's up there? Sometimes it's casually referred to as space traffic control. It's a lot more than just space traffic control, but we have to know what's up there, both in terms of active satellites, debris, old, launch engines, those type of things. And we have to know what's inside them, because sometimes the adversary likes to hide things. And so the needs that the space domain, Delta, would be vastly different, for example, than what Delta 9, who's our orbital warfare Delta, would have. And so that's why we're open right now to the different aspects of what modeling and sim can provide, because there's no, as I said earlier, there is no one fix-all action, I think, or one solution for this. This is why we're open to different engines, different modeling and simulation capabilities, just because each of our Delta's needs are vastly different.
Yeah, and I think, just historically, the lessons we've all learned would be very valuable. And, the idea, the more open your architecture as you move forward, the better, right? It allows new capabilities to be inserted much more rapidly. So one of the, some of the questions that came in even in advance, people are really interested in, and I'll go with some of the basic stuff first, and then I'll leave the lofty question because it'll require all of us to really think about. But they're really interested in a couple things like, where do they access information about industry engagements, and I don't know if any of us on this call can answer that, about industry engagements around Space Force or procurement around Space Force. And if we don't know, that's okay at this point. But at some point, I think especially industry is really trying to figure out where should they pay attention, where's the information flow going to come from. Anybody want to bite a little on that? I don't blame you. I think there's a lot. I think, it'll come through, traditional defense acquisition kind of channels. But I know that, anything that gets shared will always get shared within the community. So I guess just for everybody on the call, use NTSA as an opportunity for that information, along with the more traditional routes. Colonel Fulmer.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add to that, really, that question is for, best answered, I think, by Space Systems Command. I do know that they try to do at least once a year what they call Space Industry Day. It's usually held up in the Valley in California, the Tech Valley. I'm not very educated or knowledgeable of what they do. I know that they're looking, they bring in different industries, and they really focus not necessarily on the big, partners in our industrial base, but the smaller, new upstart businesses that bring a different perspective, that have done enough research and testing that they may bring a capability that's useful for us. So, but that's absolutely a question. I think it's a valid question, but it's a question for Space Systems Command.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that clarification. One question that came in also has to do with just trying to understand, more about the Space Force mission and vision, and maybe how it might differ from past security postures. And, I don't know if Colonel Peeler or Colonel Fulmer, both of you probably have been at those kind of leadership levels, who might be able to offer a little bit of insight.
Sorry, Dr. Bochenek, can you frame that first part of that question again?
Yeah, the question is, they'd like to know how the Space Force mission and vision differs from past security postures. So when Space Force was created, any kind of, I interpret it as changes, right?
So I have to say, I'm not an officer in the Space Force, although I do get to provide leadership and guidance to those young men and women who are desiring to join, right? So we're still a commissioning source for both. But I'll tell you, having worked at the higher levels of our government and on the joint staff, each of the services is kind of given a little piece of the pie. Here's where we need you to focus your energy and defend. And so each service provides a model then of their mission and vision based on what they're asked to do. So, the Air Force is given this requirement to defend the skies that surround the globe, and so fly, fight, and win over the globe, right? And the Navy has a mission in their area of responsibility on the high seas, and so the Space Force has the ultimate high ground. And so they get the chance to frame that in the way that's going to be most meaningful going forward. And I think they've obviously come up with some great ideas and plans there. But I wouldn't be surprised if that changes over time as well, as they explore and better understand this ultimate high ground, a vantage point from which they can see the entire globe and beyond, right? And so I think it's based on the mission set that's given to that service by our defense industry, our complex.
Thank you.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, I'm still not quite sure I understand what the sort of heart of the question is, but going back to why the Space Force was founded, it was founded because there's a growing threat from key adversary nations that can absolutely disrupt our access and ability to operate in, from, and through space. Which has ramifications on not only how America prosecutes war, but it has ramifications on our economy. I mean, a lot of people don't know in the American populace that, for example, you go to the ATM machine, get withdrawal cash, and the lower receipt pops out with a date timestamp that comes from GPS. if we were to lose that capability, then that would have ramifications for our economy. You know, but NASA, SpaceX, a lot of these, you know, other corporations have big plans to move beyond what I refer to as the world's or the globe's littoral space coastline into, you know, deeper space, eventually setting up permanent moon bases, going to Mars, you know, et cetera. And so, you know, the Space Force has been set up and is designed to, as advances in space continue to happen, as man, you know, begins the initial journey of leaving this planet and setting up permanent bases on the moon and going beyond, you know, we're focused on making sure that we're there to provide protection and prevent any adversary from, you know, stopping our capability or preventing our capability from taking advantage of what all that space has to offer, both from a military perspective as well as economics.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, several of the questions that have come in, both prior, people are very interested in location, right? You can see in the Q&A chat, you know, can you comment on the timeline for Space Force to transition to Huntsville? Maybe what elements are located there? And at the same token, questions about the value of having UCF located so close to Patrick Space Force Base. I think you've answered in some ways, but I just pose it back to you as it's come up in the chat.
So let me say the Space Force itself is not going to Huntsville. There is a basing action for U.S. Space Command to go to Huntsville, which is one of our now 13 combatant commands. And the aspect that will go to Huntsville, and that decision has been under review for the last 18 months. We've had the DODIG take a look at how the Air Force came to this decision to put the headquarters for U.S. Space Command in Huntsville. GAO also took a look at it. And now Secretary Kendall is looking at all the information that's available to him to make a final decision as to whether or not he's going to continue with U.S. Space Command's basing at Huntsville, or if he's going to, you know, start the process over. From a Patrick Space Force perspective, I touched on it in my opening remarks. You know, General Raymond's viewpoint is that having the doctrine in wargaming Delta at Patrick in close proximity to Team Orlando, you know, was highly advantageous for us. As I said, Orlando is the capital of the United States for modeling and simulation, and for the work that I'm going to be doing and those that come after me, you know, having access to the latest modeling and sim, having people that you know, have gone through different levels of education programs, whether it's bachelor's, master's, or PhD in modeling and sim, having access to those type of people, as well as industry, as well as, like I said earlier, the Air Force Modeling and Simulation Agency is in Orlando, the Army Synthetic Training Environments in Orlando. So it provides for us, you know, a really great team that we can pull from, and we're not having to reinvent the wheel. We want the Space Force was designed to be a lean and agile force, and so the funds that we procure every year from Congress are focused on prosecuting the mission. And so we don't have a lot of funds to try to constantly reinvent the wheel. We want to know what's out there, whether it's commercial off-the-shelf capability, whether it's something that the Army or the Air Force has developed, or even the Navy with the Joint Simulation Environment out of Pax River in Virginia. But Orlando provides a very nice symmetry for us that we will absolutely make use of once the decision is made for Delta 10 to go down to Patrick.
Thank you, and for the clarification and for answering. And we look forward to to being a partner, engaging and helping support you in any way we can. We're almost at the top of the hour, so I will ask a kind of an open-ended question, because all of us probably could have a different view, and it's really around simulation and training. And if we were to look into a crystal ball 5 years from now, what might we see, right? How do we see simulation and training in the next 5 years? And I would say 5 to 10 years. Anybody?
Well, Dr. Bochenek, let me take a shot at this. I'll take a swing. You know, at the sessions level, at the, you know, basic college level where we're teaching Air Force ROTC, our mission is to develop leaders of character. And right, so we're not so specific on creating a specific Space Force officer that knows how to do this thing or Air Force officer that knows how to do that, but we're actually developing leaders of character. I think as we move forward, our young people have all the ideas. They already exist in this other space that many of us can't really comprehend very well. And I think that there's an opportunity for us, even when we're just developing leaders of character, to get into that space and to help them work that. So for example, in a previous job that I had, we were working with the modeling and simulation industry to try to get some, for example, VR goggles to give to our maintainers. So there's a broke aircraft overseas, and we need some maintenance specialists to go over and fix it. Well, why not give them those VR goggles to when they get on their American Airlines flight, and they can view what they're about to do. They can put those on, they can practice going through the motions, they can open that piece of equipment up virtually on the 6-hour flight so that when they get on the ground, they're ready to go, right? This is a type of metaverse. We also did some training. We had folks in Dover, Delaware, training with folks in California, and we were all, I didn't know it was called the metaverse, but there were 8 of us standing around looking at this model of a C-17. It was a 3D model in our glasses, and we were talking to each other, pointing at things together. That boggled my mind at the time, but this is really where our young people already are. And we need to find a way to extend our education and our training into those spaces. I think we can be much more effective and leverage some really cool capabilities. And that's just opening the door a little bit to what the future holds. I think there's a real importance, there's a real value in face-to-face, one-on-one communications, especially when we're developing leaders for our nation's military. But let's not cast aside this other environment that exists, for which we could also get some really valuable training and be immersed more in the thing that we're trying to figure out. There's my pitch.
I love that. You know, and when I think of things, it's engaging the creativity, it's engaging innovation, it's engaging the minds and hearts of people around a very important mission set, right? And that engagement, using these kind of, you know, if you want to coin it, the meta digital twin, the metaverse, that's a place where people can engage in a distributed way with real information, real data, and I would say that, you know, interject innovation in a much more quick way, right, to decision. So thank you for
Grace. Let me chime in real quick. You know, when I was listening to Colonel Peeler's description of the folks on the American airline flight using AR/VR to get ready for a mission they would do when they landed. Kind of reminds me of a discussion in a couple of articles I've seen lately where we talk about the metaverse, and you know, I think the metaverse wasn't called that, but it's been going on in the military for a long time. Mm-hmm. Also looking back at, you know, our initial purpose was to really lead tech transfer from the military to other vertical markets and private industry. What we've seen in the last few years is that private industry outside of defense, when you look at companies like Apple and Google and Amazon, they spend so much more on research than the federal government can these days. You know, now the learning has to go both ways. And so obviously without violating any, you know, security clearances or anything else, I think the opportunity to share with, I'll call it defense versus traditional industry, I think that'll be much more important going forward.
Thanks, George. Can't agree more. Colonel Fulmer, any thoughts on that?
So, you know, I thought Colonel Peeler did an excellent job describing where he saw modeling simulation going the next 5 years, and I'm absolutely on board with what he said. So it goes back to earlier comments that, you know, it's going to be the captain, the lieutenant, the sergeant, the specialist that's going to be on the ops floor that's going to have to deal with the initial, you know, beginnings of a space war. And then they're going to have to know their platform in and out, and they're going to have to understand when they're seeing certain indications, what systems are being affected by those because of those indications. And the only way to do that is to have a virtual or simulated environment that can go in and take apart the satellite and understand the details. And I think that training begins as soon as they get out to Vandenberg for initial qualification training, and then it continues to advance throughout their career.
So I will, my parting comment, and thank you for that, Colonel Fulmer, is that, you know, in some ways a new paradigm, right? When you talk lean and you talk innovation, the idea of this collaboration of us on this call, the you know, communities that we represent and how we engage will be really important. And thinking about new paradigms where we can help accelerate the, you know, not just the technology development, but then the you know, adoption of that technology will be critical. I want to thank the panel members for joining today, and for all of the comments, insights, the things that you provided that give us a little bit more to think about as we march along together in pursuit of supporting all of the space missions in the future. So thank you all. I'm sure that the you know, the audience would be, if we were in person, they would clap. So I will do that on their behalf. Thank you very much for your participation, and I will turn it back over to Admiral Robb.
Well, thanks, Grace. This is a great panel. Appreciate the time from the panelists, and this is an important topic for us. It's growing interest, and this was a great start to what we think will be a series of webinars about the Space Force and where it's going. So our next webinar will be on the 28th of September, where we're going to have version 2 of the human performance piece that we started a couple of months ago. So it was well attended, and I think this one will be great. I'd be remiss if I didn't put in a plug for ITSEC 2022, which is going to be held in Orlando, 28 November to 2 December. And the metaverse and a thing we call the ITSEC First will be a big topic this year, with some demonstrations on the show floor. And as I mentioned earlier, that we expect the Chief of the Space Force to actually be one of the keynote speakers, along with the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. So that's going to be great. And we look forward to embracing the Space Force within the ITSEC family and the planning community. So if you have any follow-on questions for me or Grace or the panel, just send them to me at jrob@ntsa.org. And again, we appreciate your attendance today, and have a great day.
Thank you.